I have surrendered my soul at the fearless feet of the Mother. Am I afraid of death any more? Unto the tuft of hair on my head is tied the almighty mantra, Mother Kali's name. My body I have sold in the marketplace of the world, and with it have bought Sri Durga's name. Deep within my heart I have planted the name of Kali, the wish-fulfilling tree of heaven. When Yama, king of death, appears, to him I shall open my heart and show it growing these. I have cast out from me my 6 unflagging foes, the 6 passions. Ready am I to sail life's sea, crying, to Durga, victory. প্রাণ সপেছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি আমি আর কি জামের ভয় দেখেছি আমি আর কি জামের ভয় রেখেছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি কালে নাম মহামন্ত্র আত্মশীর্ষে খাই বেঁধেছি কালে নাম মহামন্ত্র আত্মশীর্ষে খাই বেঁধেছি কালে শীর্ষে খাই বেঁধেছি আমি দেহ বেছে ভাবের হাটে দুর্গা নাম কিনে এনেছি আমি দেহ বেছে ভাবের হাটে দুর্গা নাম কিনে এনেছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি আর কি জামের ভয় রেখেছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি কালে নাম কল্পতরু কালে নাম কল্পতরু হৃদয়ে রোপণ করেছি কালে নাম কল্পতরু হৃদয়ে রোপণ করেছি এবার সময় এলে হৃদয় খুলে দেখাবো তাই বসে আছি এবার সময় এলে হৃদয় খুলে দেখাবো তাই বসে আছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি আমি আর কি জামের ভয় রেখেছি অভয় পদে প্রাণ সপেছি দেহের মধ্যে চজন কুজন তোদের ঘরে দূর করেছি দেহের মধ্যে চজন কুজন তোদের ঘরে দূর করেছি দেহের মধ্যে চজন কুজন তোদের ঘরে দূর করেছি দেহের মধ্যে চজন কুজন তোদের ঘরে Ram Prasad bole, Durga bole, Jatra kore bhoshe achi. Ram Prasad bole, Mama bole, Jatra kore bhoshe achi. Abhoy pode pran shopchi. Abhoy pode pran shopchi. Ami ar ki jamer bhoy rekhechi. Ami ar ki jamer bhoy rekhechi. Abhoy pode pran shopchi. Abhoy pode pran shopchi. Abhoy pode pran shopchi.
Tadekam smaramas-tadekam bhajamaha Tadekam jagat sakshirupam namamaha Sadekam nidhanam niralam amisham Bhavam bodhipotam sharanyam vrajamaha Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. On that alone do we meditate, that alone do we worship, to that alone, the witness of the universe, do we bow. To that one who is our sole eternal support, the self-existent Lord, the raft to safety across the ocean of this world, do we come for refuge. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning. Wonderful to wish all of you a beautiful Sunday morning, and also it is the first day of Hanukkah, thanks to our tradition here of celebrating. I saw the menorah in the shrine and realized that today is the first day of Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of light. And for 8 days we'll be lighting the candles in the shrine on this journey from darkness to light. My topic today is making friends with death. And it seems like a kind of paradoxical topic because death, our friend, isn't death always the enemy? It seems like we're always fighting death. We're always trying to escape death. We don't want to have anything to do with death. We don't want to think about it, certainly. And how can death be our friend? How can we make friends with death? It seems like a very appropriate topic today because there's so much death in the news. As we all know, we're stuck in a pandemic and death seems to be lurking around the corner behind every mask or behind every unmasked somebody. And well, over 5 million people have died of COVID-19 disease in the world, well over 5 million. And in this country, 777,000. I remember they made a big deal of it when we reached 100,000. But after that, we passed 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, now 777,000. And in 2020, the third leading cause of death was COVID-19, with 345,323 of our brothers and sisters left this mortal plane with the help of COVID-19. That's after. Number 2 is cancer, 599,000, and heart disease, 690,000. And number 4 injuries, including accidental overdoses, car crashes, falls, etc., at 192,000. So just now we read, if we do read the newspapers, we know that the Omicron variant has been discovered and is prowling in the respiratory systems of we don't know how many people all over the world and spreading, and oh my gosh, everybody's terrified, and new lockdowns and everything. So are people afraid of death, do you think? Yeah. People are terrified of death. People are terrified. We're afraid. We're all afraid to die. And yes, we will die. We will die. There is no doubt about it. And yet, we're all terrified of it. This is King Yudhishthira, the great king of the Mahabharata, the eldest of the Pandava brothers. The story goes that to make the story short, he was asked by the Yaksha, what is the most amazing thing in this world? What's the most wonderful or amazing, incredible thing? And he answered, and I'll chant the Sanskrit, Ahanyahani bhutani gachanti hayamalayam sheshastarvamichanti kimascharyamatah param. What is more amazing than this? Kim ascharyamatah param. What is more amazing than this? That every day people are dying around us, left and right, all around us. People are dying. They're all going where? They're going to the abode of Yama, Yamalayam. And yet, nobody wants to die. Everybody wants to live forever. Nobody thinks that I also am going to have to do that. That's the most amazing thing. And this is a concise expression of our conflicted relationship with death. Our conflicted relationship with death. We know it's coming. We know it somewhere, at least intellectually. We all know that we are going to die. All right? And yet, we have a strange complex around it of denial. Well, not me, or at least I'm not going to think about it. And then a fear, terror, fascination, a fascination for it, and fighting it, battle. So these kind of four different ways that we avoid dealing with death in a meaningful way is by denial, fear, fascination, and battle. It's like Marcel Duchamp, the great modern artist, who wrote his epitaph before he died. On his tombstone is written, D'ailleurs, c'est toujours les autres qui meurent. Besides, it's always the others who die. So actually a very nice joke, because he must have recognized that we're always thinking that, and yet it also comes to us. And he put that on his tombstone. So on the one hand, we Americans, here in America, we are in denial of death. It's a death-denying society, and yet we're fascinated. See all the movies and television shows full of death, people getting killed, especially violent death. We're fascinated with violent death and horrible deaths. And horror movies are a very popular genre. In horror movies, people are always dying in horrible ways. The video games, extremely popular. We both kill lots of people imaginarily, in imagination in the video games, and end up getting killed finally. So on the one hand, this fascination, and yet our own death, actually facing our own death, we can't do it. To accept our own death is very difficult. We're in denial about it. And we see in the world, and especially in the wealthy countries like this one, a furious consumption of the world's resources. We're furiously consuming the limited resources, completely unmindful of the impending collapse of the ecosystem. It's a collective denial of impending death of the ecosystem which supports life. The climate crisis we can call a collective denial of the impending extinction of the human race. It sounds rather brutal, and maybe you think I'm exaggerating. This human race will come to an end, one day or another. It may not be next year, it may not be in 50 years, but if we don't get together and address the climate crisis, it may be in 100 or 200 years. And if we do get together and address the climate crisis, it may be in 10,000 years or 100,000 years. But it will come to an end, because everything which had a beginning must have an end. That is just in the nature of things. And this very earth will die. Our sun, which gives us life and light and warmth, the source of all life, really, will die. It's a fusion engine running on hydrogen. When the hydrogen runs out, what happens? It turns into a red giant. Where are the outer limits of that red giant star? They are beyond the orbit of the earth. The earth will become absorbed in the sun. That's it. So this whole earth, all that we hold precious here, it'll be absorbed into the sun one day. So yes, even the earth will die, the human race will become extinguished. Long before that, I'm sure. So then we have our death rituals. Even our death rituals now are a kind of denial of death. What happens? We pay somebody to take away the body of our loved one who has died, and they put on makeup and try to make the body look like the person's still alive. And our language, oh, he passed away. As if, where did they go? Away, passed away, or kicked the bucket. Died has a great finality to it. Now, see the importance of language. In our Vedanta tradition, what do we say? Somebody left the body. She left the body. That is a much wiser and much truer statement of what actually happens at death, according to our Vedanta tradition. We leave the body. Deha tyaga, leaving the body. So this is in our language also. That's why I always like to say, so when someone has died, I always say someone has left the body. I don't like to say, oh, someone passed away. Oh, they passed away. God bless them. They left the body. What is there? They left the body and went on to regions of higher glory and light. Why not? So on the one hand, we are denying death. On the other hand, we're fighting it. Furiously fighting it, rejecting it. A little gray hair, oh my God. Hair dye. Or shave it, that's my solution. And anti-aging cream, plastic surgery, all these things. For medicine, for doctors, death is the enemy. To fight death, preserve life at all costs, is the tradition of the medical establishment, leading to the huge costs and often terrible interventions, leading to terrible suffering during the last few days of life for many people. It was an interesting observation about modern medicine, which I read this morning. Modern medicine has not only prolonged living, but it has also prolonged dying. Recent advances in biomedicine have converted grave illnesses like cancer into chronic illnesses. Used to be, we get a heart attack and we die. Now we get a heart attack and we're revived and we're given drugs to keep us alive. And so gradually, we linger and linger and linger for decades, but gradually getting weaker and weaker, and then we die. So it's like that. What used to be death now becomes a long, drawn-out process. Well, last month we celebrated Halloween here, and it's to me, a most curious holiday. Most curious holiday because it seems to be, on the one hand, entirely secular. There's no higher ideal. You try to scare people with scary images of death, and you go out and beg for candy. And all the other holidays in America have some kind of higher ideal, at least a taste of it. Christmas, of course, is celebrating the birth of Jesus. Thanksgiving, we have the ideal of gratitude. New Year's Day, we're celebrating the new birth, a chance to start afresh. Memorial Day, Labor Day, we're celebrating those who have gone on, or the noble work, all that. Halloween, what are we celebrating at Halloween? Is it just fun? It's and the death theme. On my morning walk, I'd see this horrible skeleton starting to crawl out of a coffin that's sort of emerging out of the ground. And people get really creative with their Halloween displays on their front lawns. And it's a kind of poking fun at death, poking fun at it. There's a fascination for the macabre, the ghosts and dead bodies coming out of the grave and all of that, and I guess there's a fun to it, a fun of being scared when we know that it's not really a threat. That's why we love horror movies. We love getting scared and when we know that actually we're safe. And yet the death for most of us is actually really scary because it's actually coming. It's coming for us. One blogger made a very cogent observation. Halloween is our now secular substitute for serious death conversations and rituals. It lets us spit in the face of Mr. Death. It allows us to laugh into the abyss instead of staring at it in dread. So in our discomfort, we laugh at death. But death always has the last laugh. He always wins. Actually, there was a healthier attitude embedded in the roots of Halloween. Halloween has its roots in a Celtic observance called Samhain, and I don't know anything about it except for what I read about it online. It was a New Year's celebration held in the fall, an acknowledgement, a seasonal acknowledgement of the annual change from a season of life, that's the summer and the harvest, to one of death, that's the winter. The Celts used Samhain celebrations to settle debts, thin their herds of livestock, and appease the spirits, the kinds of preparations one might make if they are genuinely unsure whether they will survive the winter. So it was an acknowledgement of the reality of death and a kind of preparation. Maybe this will be the last one for me. And then when Christianity came into the picture, it absorbed that celebration into what became known as All Saints' Day. And the next day, All Souls' Day, where we remember those who have gone before us, those on whose shoulders we stand. And so the evening before All Saints' Day was called All Hallows Evening. All Hallows Even, All Halloween. Halloween, that's where Halloween comes from. So then we have in Mexico a very, outwardly it looks a little similar. We have skulls and altars to the dead. And yet it's a completely different celebration. It's the Dia De Los Muertos on November 1 to 2, which is a joyous holiday of celebration rather than mourning. It's a day of celebration. Families and friends gather to pay respects and to remember friends and family members who have died. And often the celebrations take a humorous tone. People remember the funny events and anecdotes about the departed. And the idea is that the departed wouldn't like us to be grieving as they're in a place of joy. So it celebrates death as a part of our experience of being human. A very healthy attitude, honoring, respecting, remembering those who have gone before us, and recognizing that we stand on their shoulders. We learn from our elders, and they pass away, and then leave us, leave their bodies, and then we are left to become the elders. And yet we still try to run from death. There's a humorous story with a deep meaning to it, told by the Sufis, I believe, about a merchant and his servant in Baghdad many, many years ago. Once upon a time, there was a merchant in Baghdad, well-to-do, who sent his servant, as he did every day that they sent him into the market to purchase the groceries for the day. And one Saturday, his servant comes back very quickly, white as a sheet and all a tremble, and says, "Sir, I saw death in the market. Somebody jostled me, and I turned and looked, and it was death. And he looked right at me, and he threatened me. Sir, please, can you lend me your horse? I've got to get out of here. I'm going to go to Samara. I have someone I can stay with in Samara. I've got to flee." The merchant was a compassionate man. So he gave his servant to the horse. They saddled up the horse, and the servant mounted the horse and galloped off towards Samara, 80 miles to the north. Now the merchant became curious about what happened in the market, so he went into the market and looked around, and sure enough, there was Death walking around in the market. So he accosted him. He said, "Hey, Death, why did you threaten my servant? Why did you upset him so much?" And Death was very polite. He said, "Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. I was just so surprised to see him here. I was so surprised to see your servant in Baghdad. You see, I have an appointment with him tonight in Samara." Swami Vivekananda's powerful words we can remember just now. Then there is the tremendous fact of death. The whole world is going towards death. Everything dies. All our progress, our vanities, our reforms, our luxuries, our wealth, our knowledge have that one end, death. That is all that is certain. Cities come and go, empires rise and fall, planets break into pieces and crumble into dust to be blown about by the atmospheres of other planets. Thus it has been going on from time without beginning. Death is the end of everything. Death is the end of life, of beauty, of wealth, of power, of virtue too. Saints die and sinners die, kings die and beggars die. They are all going to death. And yet, he says, this tremendous clinging on to life exists. Somehow we do not know why we cling to life. We cannot give it up. So this is the news for all of us. We are going to die, and we can take nothing with us except the state of our mind and our actions which we have done up till now. These we take with us, our past deeds. So what would happen? What would happen if, instead of running away from death, instead of denying it and being terrified of it, we can make friends with it? We can start to accept it, gently embrace it, understand that it's just part of life. What is born shall die. And yet, at the same time, of course, in our Vedantic tradition, hold on to that which does not die. Recognize that, yes, this body will die. I will have to let go of all that I hold dear, and yet I will not die. I will just leave this body. Sri Ramakrishna counseled his students and counsels us to remember death constantly. One should constantly remember death. And this seems like a recipe for depression for many people, but not for sincere spiritual seekers like us, not for sincere seekers of the divine. It's not that we should live in constant fear of death or live in constant grief that we shall die. When we can constantly remember death and begin to come to terms with it, it is actually then that we can really begin to live. First of all, if we can truly embrace death and accept the fact of the inevitability of death, then really what is there to fear? If we don't fear death anymore, what is there to fear? The coward fears the coward experiences 1,000 deaths, but the hero dies only once. Fearless. If we're not afraid of death, what is there to be afraid of? Many people are terrified of different things, spiders or public speaking or rejection or all these different flying in airplanes. If we really come to terms with death, why should we be afraid of anything? Secondly, when we really keep the awareness of death in our minds, in our hearts, that makes this moment so precious, infinitely precious. We can begin to live in the present moment. When we hold the inevitability of death before our mind's eye, this moment becomes so important because we're never guaranteed the next moment. Most of us live, where do most of us live? In our dreams for the future and our regrets over the past. We live in dreams and regrets. And we ignore the only time that actually exists, this present moment. Right now. This is it. And there's a tremendous freedom when we can begin to live in this moment. In some sense, every day dies, right? At the end of the day is over. This day will never return. This moment as it is, with us gathered here together, discussing death in this temple, it will never come again. We shall never experience this again. This moment died. Every moment dies in a sense. And yet, every moment is experienced in the eternal now, in the eternally present moment, because that's the only time that is. We are not in the past and we are not in the future. We are right here. So, it may seem paradoxical, but if we hold on to, the more we can be aware of this inevitability of death, the more we can place ourselves here now. And it's a wonderful preparation for when the time comes to leave our bodies. Mindfully aware of the moment. When we can remember death, when we can come to terms with death, we can gain a great deal of detachment. One of the big causes of our suffering in life is our attachments. We get so attached to stuff, to little things. You know, the problem of stuff, even in our monastery is full of stuff. We need people give us stuff, and we're monks. We're not supposed to have any stuff, and yet I've been here about 10 years. I've got a room full of stuff. How did it happen? We don't know. Everybody has this. People have whole houses full of stuff that they don't need and they don't use. Give it up. Give it up. As long as it holds us back. Somebody says an unkind thing to us in the morning and the whole day is spoiled. Don't sweat it. That person's going to die, I'm going to die, this day is going to die. Don't sweat it. Don't sweat it so much. I asked Swami Swahanandaji, the previous head of this center, once, Maharaj, how do you stay so detached? How do you not get caught up in all the little dramas that go on. And he said, you see, we have one foot in the grave. Of course, he was, at that time, he was probably about 75 years old or something. So he had this very strong consciousness of his own mortality, the mortality of his body, that he will have to leave it. So this idea, one foot in the grave. So why sweat the small stuff? Don't sweat the small stuff. It may be hard. We have some young people here of age 25, and we have some of us are in the 50s, and then there's 60s and 70s and 80s. And once we reach the 80s, there's not that much longer to go, is there? Not that much longer. It starts to get more real, like, oh, it's really coming. It could come tomorrow for me. It could come tomorrow for our youngest person here. And yet, once we become 80, it starts to be like, well, yeah, it really could be pretty soon. It could be any year now, if not any day. It could be any year. And it's funny, we don't know when it's going to come. Like our Shiva, Swami Atmatattvananda, who very recently left us, he was so full of vigor. And in his 90s, he lived till 92, and until 91, he was so full of vigor. And then almost imperceptibly, we didn't really notice it, but he started slowing down. And he stopped coming to our monks' reading at night. And he started keeping to himself more. And by the time we realized that, hey, he's not really doing so well, it seemed like he was making the preparations. And then he got sick, and he had to go to the hospital, and then he didn't come back to the monastery after that. He ended up going to a board and care place, and luckily we were able to be with him in the last few days of his life. A number of people were with him, so he saw it coming, but he didn't let us know in so many words. Yet he had spent his life preparing for it. So now, I think perhaps the reason Sri Ramakrishna especially emphasized constantly remembering death is that it is a great, it inspires us, it impels us, it demands that we do intensive spiritual practice. If death is inevitable, then what doesn't die? I've read in the books, I've been told in the temple that I don't die, that my true nature is immortal. But I don't know that directly, personally, as my own personal experience. Then, how do I find out? Perform spiritual practices. Practice meditation, practice prayer, practice repeating the mantra, japa, study the scriptures, talk to the saints, find out who I really am. Find out that who I really am, who does not die. So this is a great benefit of remembering death. It reminds us to keep up our spiritual practice, which is so important. And why is it so important? In the Vedanta tradition, the moment of death is considered a great opportunity to attain liberation, to attain to the divine. We are now locked into these bodies, and yet we are told, and we hold, that we are not bodies, we are consciousness. When that consciousness, which is who we are, is unhooked, unhinged from this physical frame, that's a great opportunity to merge into the infinite consciousness, which is the ground of everything, and attain our birthright, infinite bliss in the divine. But how does it happen? It takes practice. We practice now. The state of mind at the moment of death is considered very important in our tradition. Where will we go? What's the trajectory of the human soul after death? It's determined in large part by the state of mind at the time of death, and all the spiritual practices that have gone towards cultivating that state of mind. So what is it that we want to realize? Let's just, since this is Vedanta Society, let me read a little Vedanta, the Upanishads. The Katha Upanishad is the wonderful teachings of Yama, the god of death, to Nachiketa, his very ardent disciple. And in the course of the teachings, he tells him, Nasamparaya pratibhati balam pramadyantam vittamohena mudham ayan loko nasti para iti mani punah punar vashamapadyate me. He tells him, see, there are these people who are like children. They are deluded. They think this world is all there is. There is no other. What happens to them? They come again and again under my sway, under my control. Means death. I come for them again and again. They never know the reality. They never know the supreme reality. So they are heedless. They are perplexed by the delusion of wealth. Vittamohena mudham. So what happens to those who realize the truth? Ashabdam asparsham arupam avyayam tatharasam nityam agandhavachayat anadyanantam mahatah parandhruvam nichayatam mrityumukhat pramuchyate. I love this last line. Mrityumukhat pramuchyate. They are freed from the jaws of death. Mrityumukha, the very jaws of death that have got us all in his clasp, in his jaws. We're all in the jaws of death, and yet we can be freed. How? When we realize that infinite reality, which is without beginning and end, which is beyond even the great and unchanging, which has no sound, it is intangible, it has no form, it does not decay, it has no taste, it is eternal, it is beyond all our senses, it is the infinite consciousness. When we realize that, when we know that to be our true self, we are freed from the jaws of death. The great King Parikrita, who was the grandson of Arjuna, of the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata. So King Parikrita of ancient India, he had a great blessing, as it were, in the form of a curse. And this is the story. He was out hunting one day and he got tired out after a whole day of hunting and romping through the forest, and he came upon an ashrama where there was a great sage in deep meditation. Now the king, he was hungry, he was tired, he was thirsty. And in the Indian tradition, if you come to an ashrama, you will be offered a seat, you will be offered something to drink and something to eat. And so he's coming there, and he's a king after all, so he's got a little ego. And he comes and he says, hi, I'm here. And nothing happens. The sage is actually immersed in deep meditation. He's unaware of the presence of the king. And so he makes his presence known. He asks for something to drink. He asks for some food. And there's no response from the sage. He's actually in deep meditation. And the king is momentarily overpowered by anger, as happens to all of us, especially maybe when we're hungry. He's hungry, he's thirsty, he's tired. And he gets pissed off. He thinks this guy's a faker. And he finds a dead snake. And he picks it up with a couple of sticks, and he drapes it around the neck of the sage, and he leaves in a huff and goes back to the kingdom, the palace in Hastinapura. And the sage's son comes to the ashram and finds a dead snake around his dad's neck, and he's furious. And he utters a curse. The man who has done this will die in 7 days from snake bite. Now these sages, their curses cannot be undone. So they will be fulfilled. The sage, when he came out of his meditation and he realized what his son had done, he was really aghast, because he would never curse someone. But anyhow, what was done, and the word came to Parikrita that this had happened, that he's going to die in 7 days. What would you do? If you went to the doctor, say, and the doctor said, it doesn't look good, you're going to die in 7 days. And as the joke goes, I've got bad news and worse news. The bad news is the tests show you're going to die in 7 days. The even worse news is I should have told you 6 days ago. So what would you do? 7 days. It's very interesting. What did Parikrita do? He immediately gave up his kingdom. He installed his son on the throne, and he went to the bank of the holy river Ganga, and he started fasting and praying and getting ready for death. And a number of sages came there, hearing about the great king's resolve to fast and pray and study, including one young sage full of purity and shining with divine light, the great Shukadeva. And the king asked him, well, how should I prepare for death? How do I die? And Shukadeva proceeded to give him the teachings of the great Hindu scripture, the Bhagavata Purana. So that's how the Bhagavata was told to King Parikshit on the bank of the Ganges while he was waiting for death. And of course, the book, Shukadeva goes on to describe the various incidents in the life of the divine incarnation, Sri Krishna, and he is prepared for death. And on the last day, the king gets the snake bite, and he leaves the body and enters the heavenly realms, attains the divine. So how fortunate for him. He took it as a blessing. What was a curse ended up being a blessing. He had 7 full days in full awareness to prepare for death. May we be so fortunate. About the studies that I was looking at show that about 10% of us will die suddenly without any warning. Heart attack or major car crash or very rarely lightning strike or something like that, but or stroke, about 10%. The rest of us will have some warning. It'll be a little bit more it'll be more drawn out, either a matter of days, weeks, months, or even years. Actually, if you really think about it, we all have the diagnosis. We all have the diagnosis. You're going to die. Only it's unknown when. We can't read the expiration date on the package. So if we're going on a big journey, we ought to prepare. If, say, we're going on a big trip to India, then I will certainly spend quite a bit of time preparing, researching the destination, purchasing the tickets when the prices are cheap, packing my bags, contacting people, making sure everything is ready to go. So we have our reservation for this journey too. The ticket is booked, the reservation is made, only we don't know what the date is. And it may be that we get very little notice. It may be that suddenly death comes and says, let's go. So we need to pack our bags, that is, prepare ourselves. So I wanted to just touch on some practical things we can do, that we all can do and all actually should do. Little practical things like make a will. How many of us here have made a will? Wow. Not too many. I made one, but I didn't get it signed by a notary yet, so it's not really valid. So make a will. Why? It's a direct acknowledgement that, yes, I'm going to die. We think, well, I'm not going to die now. Why should I make a will? Why should I make a will? I'm not going to die now. I'll think about that later. Actually, it's a very healthy thing to do. It's an acknowledging that, yes, okay, I'm going to die. What do I want to the wealth that I have amassed, or that I have accumulated, if I have accumulated any wealth, or my personal belongings? What do I want to happen with those things when I'm no longer here? So it's a good thing to do. Secondly, advanced directive. What do we want to happen at the end of our lives? Say we have a severe stroke and are, to all observable indications, unconscious and not going to revive. Do we want to be kept alive with tubes? There are bodies, probably with souls still stuck in them, being kept alive on ventilator machines and feeding tubes in certain medical facilities in this country. Thousands of people just kept alive by machines, no external consciousness. Do we want that? How many of us would want that? Make an advance directive. Fill out, it's a form that specifies what kind of medical care you want at the end. If there's no one around who knows what to do, it could happen. Because it's very difficult sometimes for kids to say, okay, pull the plug on Dad. We love him too much, so I can't pull the plug. Who knows, maybe he'll recover. So it's a document which legally specifies what kind of care we do and don't want in the case of severely debilitating illness or injury. Then we can also do things like plan our death ritual. What kind of death ritual would we like? Cremation, burial, sky burial. There's a new one, composting, body composting. It's actually very attractive. It's been recently approved for testing, I think in California. It's the big stainless steel canister, and the body is placed in there along with, sorry about that, along with some wood chips and some bacteria. And believe it or not, it takes a month. It takes just a month. The temperature it's warmed up and it's turned regularly, and it takes a month, and the body is turned into very rich compost. Wonderful for your somebody's flower garden, or to nourish a tree in the forest. It's wonderful. What came from the earth goes back to the earth. Also, I would suggest we not shy from the death of others. It's a blessing. It's a great blessing to be at the bedside of someone who's dying, to sit with them, and perhaps even have the privilege of sitting with them as they leave the body. It's a wonderful experience. And we realize that death is not something to be feared. It's something very sacred, very sacred. To perform the death rituals, to bathe a body. How many of us have bathed a dead body? Anyone? Oh, yeah, just a few of us. It's a great blessing. There's nothing scary about a dead body. It won't do anything to you. It's the least scary thing there is. It's a blessing, because the person who dwelt in this body for so long has left it, and now we have the chance to honor that person by bathing their body, dressing it in nice clothes, and preparing it for the funeral. It's a beautiful, nothing frightening. It's, on the one hand, we realize that it's just an empty shell, and on the other hand, we get this privilege of kind of intimate service to that container, which carried the spirit for so many years. We had the opportunity to do this for both of the Swamis who recently died, Swami Yogananda in Trabuco and Swami Atmatattvanandaji, Shiva, here in Hollywood. We had the chance to help bathe their bodies, and we shave. Swamis, we get our heads shaved when we after death. The head gets shaved, and get dressed in the new robes, the traditional robes, and to do some rituals and prayer and chanting. And it's a really sacred time. So I guess we're coming up on the end of the hour, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity in thinking about death to get familiar with it. And in that way, when we spend time with someone who's dying, we begin to lose our fear of death. Very often, people who are coming close to the end, they're losing their fear of death as they begin to have one foot in both worlds, as it were. We have many anecdotes about people seeing deceased relatives come, seeing light, and then they cross over. I meant to mention at the beginning, but we can turn to it now, that beautiful song which opened our talk today, sung by Preeti. Thank you for that. It was so touchingly sung. It's a beautiful song of Ram Prasad, one of Sri Ramakrishna's favorite songs. He sang this song often. And the song is, I have surrendered my soul at the fearless feet of the mother. Can I have any fear of death? How can death frighten me now? I have totally dedicated myself to the Divine Mother, in this case, Ram Prasad song, of course. Really, this is the ultimate solution for most of us as devotees of God, as seekers of the divine, who follow the path of love, who follow the path of devotion, to throw our whole lot in with the Lord, to dedicate our lives fully to the divine, to place our lives and our deaths and everything in the hands of the Divine Mother. Then we know that Mother will take care. Why should I be afraid of death? And there's some very charming lines in this song. There's one is that the Mother Kali's name is the wish-fulfilling tree, and I have planted it in my heart. So Mother's name, as we repeat the Mother's name, we plant that wish-fulfilling tree of heaven in our heart, that wish-fulfilling tree which is the Mother's name. And this time when death comes, what am I going to do? When Yama comes to take me down to the netherworld, I'm going to open my heart and see, the mother is here. You can't take me. So in this way, we get the last laugh. We get the last laugh. When we can show that the divine is here, we get the last laugh. Not that we won't leave this body. We leave this body, but fearlessly, because we're going straight to the Divine Mother, straight to the Lord. Who, in whichever way we conceive of the divine, that's where we go. So I thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. And we have a closing piece of music. beautiful. I couldn't quite catch the words.
Yeah, Holy Mother's words about not fearing death and keeping your mind on the Lord, and you'll see your chosen ideal.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for that. Our announcements are... next week, our speaker will be Swami Chidbrahmananda, back from the East Coast tomorrow, and his topic, Practical Grace. He's a wonderful speaker. Later this month, on the 26th of December, will be Holy Mother's birthday puja celebration. Tonight is, as I mentioned at the beginning, Hanukkah. We light the candles during our evening prayer as our little observance of that. And there's an announcement about our bookshop hours. Our Sunday bookshop hours are being curtailed. Sunday, the bookshop will be open only from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. instead of 4 p.m. So the bookshop is open from from Thursday and Friday, 11 to 1, and 2:30 to 4:30. Saturdays, 11 to 5, and Sundays, 10 to 2. Most welcome to do your Christmas shopping or find some good reading material there. And we have a lot of gifts and whatnot too. If there are any questions or objections, we can take just a minute or two for that.
I think the near-death experiences that I've had were so helpful that to see that I'm talking about the near-death experiences that I've had, a few of them, and I feel like if people want to see on YouTube, look it up, near-death experiences from other people. It's so inspiring and
Thank
really,
you, Sita. Yes,
yeah.
thank you, Sita.
Okay, I'll stop there.
Yes, I'm also a big fan of reading people's accounts of near-death experiences. True, and that's a really good point, that it's a wonderful way to see what happens at the moment of death, because medical science has advanced a lot, and many people who die are resuscitated, a whole branch of medicine called resuscitation medicine, and people recover, and some of them have remarkable experiences of leaving their body, of floating above their body, seeing what's going on in the room, things that can be corroborated afterwards. It's a proof of that consciousness is not dependent on the physical form. And some of them go on to have very inspiring experiences of divinity, of infinite love and infinite joy. And many of them don't want to come back. They don't want to come back to this prison of the body. So once you have that experience, you don't have fear of death. That's a real, fear of death goes. Even reading about these experiences can be a great inspiration, and we find that they tally with the teachings of Vedanta. I've spoken on this also. You can find it on YouTube. Yeah, Dara has a question.
Thank you, Swami, for a wonderful talk. It's biological. It's built into our systems. There's every life form, whether it's the cockroach circling the drain and they're just fighting, it's kind of built into our systems.
To fight death?
Yes, it's a biological thing, and it's even when I find that, I'm up there now, and do not want to avoid it, and want to be attentive, but it's still very difficult to remember. I have an app now called We Croak. And five times a day, random times, it goes ping, and then you click on it and it says, "Don't forget, you're going to die." And it gives you different quotes, lovely quotes, but it's so hard. Is there any particular, I know the practice, would it help for us to come up with a line to remind ourselves that we can repeat through the day, or I mean, it's...
This too shall pass. This too shall pass. This too shall come to an end. This too shall change. Everything is changeful. Yes, that's hilarious. We croak. It's called We Croak.
Yes.
It's an app called We Croak. Check it out, everybody. That's also interesting that about the fear of death. Patanjali says that one of the causes is remembering painful deaths from previous incarnations, previous lives. So many times we have already been here, so many times we have died, and we don't remember it consciously, but subconsciously, remembering those painful deaths causes us to fear death. So that's an interesting attribution of that fear that seems to be wired into all living beings. Even the ant, right? Even the ant will struggle if you want to get it off your bathroom vanity. It'll struggle to get away. That's right. Yes. There was one question on the chat here that said, "Is there any prayer for a peaceful death?" Well, yeah, pray for a peaceful death. The more we are prepared, the more we are fixed in our thinking of the divine, the more peaceful we will feel at the time of death, I think. And and I think we cannot underestimate or overemphasize. We cannot overestimate or overemphasize the importance of the repeating the name of God, this practice of repeating the name of God. Very often in the last days before we leave the body from illnesses, the person will be lying on the bed just with enough strength to breathe, and that's it, like this. And then finally there'll be a breath out, and there won't be another breath in. So we don't have the energy at that point even to meditate. But if we have the name, if we've been practicing the name all along, we still have the name. The name becomes a raft to cling to, something to hold on to. So practice the name. Practicing the repetition of the name, of the mantra, is a really good preparation for death. Yes.
Thank you so much for your message today. 38 years ago, because I was very depressed and had PTSD. That's why I got initiated in mantra meditation. And so that was my reason to be initiated in mantra meditation, just because of my mental illness. But through the years, and I used to tell my friends that I say the mantra, I do mantra meditation, not for spiritual reasons, but just I said my body looks for it, to meditate twice a day. And for me, not having the fear of death came as an aha moment.
As a what?
Aha, like, oh my God, I have no fear. Like, I have no fear of death. It's just like, and I think today, looking back, I'm 66 now, so this happened like maybe my fear of death is really not there anymore. I mean,
beautiful. Maybe
like 6 years ago, it was just like, I don't know what happened. I said, I don't have in fact, I was diagnosed as having rheumatoid arthritis maybe 3 months ago. So I'm giving myself 15 years. And my only concern now is the people I care about, that they'll be okay, when I'm gone. But I don't know what happened. It just went away. It was just like, and I think it's the mantra of meditation. It what brought me here too.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So I'll close with a prayer. Oh, Michael has something.
Thank you, Swami.
Michael, nice to see you.
Once something happens, we know it's inevitable. So if birth is inevitable, doesn't it cancel out death?
Birth is inevitable, doesn't it cancel out death?
Well, we don't have a time before birth to fear it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we think about birth, it's a pretty fearsome experience.
But birth is not inevitable. Once we attain liberation, there's no coming back. Then we don't need to come back. We don't need to keep coming back. Do you want to come back again? You're welcome. You can come back. Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma mritangamaya aviravirma idhi rudrayate dakshinam mukham tena mam pahi nityam. Om shanti shanti shanti. From the unreal, lead us to the real. From darkness, lead us unto light. From death, lead us to immortality. Reach us through and through ourself, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Om, peace, peace.